West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman, who will join us in just a moment, has led more than 65 congressional Democrats in sending a letter asking what steps the Department of Homeland Security has taken to weed out domestic extremism within its own ranks, after reports concluded that more than 300 current or former DHS employees were members of the right-wing Oath Keepers group as of 2015, and Customs and Border Protection staff were working with conservative militia groups along the U.S.-Mexico border. Last March, the department itself released a report admitting there are, quote, significant gaps which have impacted its ability to comprehensively prevent, detect, and respond to threats of domestic violent extremism within the DHS. In the wake of multiple trials over the January 6th insurrection, members of Congress expressed their concern about what, if any, preventative measures Homeland Security has taken to ensure that people devoted to the overthrow of the United States government are not also its employees. The members want a detailed response from DHS by tomorrow, July 31st. Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman of New York joins me now. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. So this letter comes more than 2 years after Secretary Mayorkas launched that internal review. In the meantime, you've had this report that revealed the number of Oath Keeper members within DHS ranks, but that figure, believe it or not, was actually from 2015. We don't have an updated number about what it is, but the urgency is obviously still there. What's at risk if DHS drags its heels on this subject?
Well, the urgency, of course, has increased dramatically after January 6th, when members of the Oath Keepers and other domestic violent extremist groups tried to overthrow the government effectively. So the risk here, of course, is that the Department of Homeland Security is charged with keeping our homeland safe. And if there are domestic violent extremists within their ranks, that, of course, runs counter to their mission and could completely undermine their mission. So it's been 2 years, which is part of the reason why we followed up with yet another letter, because we appreciate the fact that the department has recognized that there are gaps here, but those gaps need to be filled. And we need to understand that there is a methodical and comprehensive process to determine whether or not there are employees of the Department of Homeland Security who have connections, ties, allegiances to domestic violent extremist groups.
How do you square or reconcile the First Amendment right to have these views and beliefs as opposed to the potential threat? I mean, the Senate just passed the annual defense bill that approved $886 billion over the next year that covers the cost of tracking terrorism abroad. But in its own report, the Department of Homeland Security admits that, quote, it had no official definition of or guidance about what constitutes a violent extremist, no workforce training to identify and report extremist activity, and insufficient funding for the already existing DHS insider threat program.
Yeah, look, the First Amendment concerns are real. The question, of course, becomes, first of all, are personal opinions being used in furtherance of professional activities? And second of all, are those personal views actually protected by the First Amendment? I know my Republican colleagues seem to now think that if you utter anything, that's protected free speech under the First Amendment. That is, of course, not the case. And so there has to be an evaluation of whether or not, A, it would be potentially protected speech, but more importantly, whether it is infiltrating any actual professional or career duties that any employees of the department are doing. But you also raise, I think, really important points. Do they need more funding? Do we need to establish by statute a definition of a domestic terrorist? That is that's been open for debate for quite some time. And now that we have FBI Director Christopher Wray confirming multiple times in public hearings that the number one threat to our national security is domestic violent extremism, well, if that's the case, then we need a whole of government approach to weed that out. And we've seen the impact and effect of that through the Department of Justice's prosecutions against domestic violent extremists who executed the January 6th overthrow.
We have a foreign terrorist organization list at the State Department. Should we have a domestic terrorist organization list here internally through DHS? I mean, what are your thoughts on how the DHS should approach the point that you just raised, this growing threat of extremism?
Look, it's something we have to evaluate and analyze very closely, especially now that we've had a number of defendants convicted for seditious conspiracy. That is a charge so rarely brought in our history, and we've now had, I believe, almost double-digit defendants from a variety of domestic violent extremist groups who've been convicted of that. So if it is truly the number one threat, and if this is something that we are even seeing infiltrating our national security, our homeland security, then we need to more aggressively root it out. And we're going to have to balance it with the First Amendment. We all understand that. But we are going to also need to make sure that our homeland is secure and safe, and that we don't have domestic violent extremists in our midst, either perpetrating crimes as they did on January 6th, or perhaps undermining the duties and responsibilities of our custom and border officials.
Let me switch gears and get your thoughts on, Congressman, on the special counsel Jack Smith. And we could see him hit Donald Trump with an indictment for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. How does that tie this back to what we've been talking about and the growing threat of domestic extremism? I mean, what will you be watching for as we await these possible charges?
Well, there's obvious overlap, given all of the convictions we've had of avowed domestic extremists for their efforts to invade the Capitol and prevent the lawful functioning of government, and effectively to overturn and overthrow the government. So it will be interesting to see what, if any, charges are brought against Donald Trump and what connections the special counsel, if any, is able to make with these domestic violent extremist groups. We all remember when Donald Trump said at the debate to the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, and that was perceived by them to be a clear message. And it's one thing if you do it one time and you may not understand that it will have that impact, but Donald Trump does it repeatedly. So he knows what impact it will have. And then the question becomes whether there were more unknown communications or coordination with these domestic violent extremist group. But that is certainly something I will be looking for.
It is Monday, the 31st of July of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special. River City Hash Mondays. That's right. It's Monday, and I guess we're going to have some sort of... Is it going to be Indictment Day again today? I don't know. The property manager is been given a letter, and I believe he's supposed to show up, and he will say, I don't have an attorney up to speed, not from Florida. And in Florida, you can't represent anybody unless you have a bar license in Florida. So what does Trump's people do? Now, ostensibly, he lives in Florida. And the people that are working there are in Florida. But I guess they're getting out-of-state lawyers so they can gum up the works. Because I guess they say this guy is the master of court delay. And they might be right, because he delays, and in the hopes that anybody who is drawing or bringing litigation against him will run out of resources or fear of running out of resources, so they'll just give up. But I think the United States of America might have a bit more resources than this wannabe billionaire. I thought he was supposed to be rich. Why is he doesn't have any money now to pay for his legal expenses, so he's actually violating the law, moving money around to pay for his legal expenses. Well, he's been grifting for so long, he just thinks everything's normal. And I still get so peeved when every single one of these conservatives, and this is not new, I noticed this way back during Nixon, is that Republicans by and large are pretty much corrupt. And they think everybody is as corrupt as them because they're good people. They see them as God's chosen. And if they're able to do the things that they do, can you imagine the things that those other people are doing? And those other people are us. So whatever heinous, lascivious, immoral act that they endeavor upon, they are convinced we do worse. Because they are good people, God's anointed. All right. Do you know why we had a separation of church and state that was absolutely insisted upon as original intent from the founders? So that we wouldn't be gaslit into believing otherwise. And here we are. We even have effing religious tests, and it says right in the Constitution, no religious tests to run for office. But I guess that means, if I remember my constitutional history classes, the argument was it's government that would put the test out. Okay. Like the county, wherever you go to vote, where you file to vote. I guess that's how they get around it, because there's certainly religious tests now. Yep. And, hey, we were warned. We were warned about the party system, too. No parties. Only chaos is on that track, and look where we are. That's right. We got a recalcitrant minority party trying to, I don't know, concrete themselves into power. You're never getting us. Well, concrete cracks. That's right. It does. And we're here to crack it. All right. What else is out there? Oh, yeah, this Musk thing. There's a couple of things about Musk. You know, one is that X that he put up on the building on Market Street, which is actually a violation of the law. And it has a weird strobing light feature that definitely violates the ADA. He puts the thing up without permits, without a design review, without any kind of review to see if it's actually safe for the materials, etc., etc. There's a whole process you go through. You can't just get a crane over there and put it up, and that's what they did. And then they took a picture, news people or somebody had a drone shot of the rooftop where they put that X on, and they have a desert garden with a bunch of soil and stones on that roof, and I want to know if they got a permit for that, because not every roof in San Francisco can hold that kind of weight. When did that get put in? Just wondering. But, yeah, so there's that. And then it turns out this little treasonous mofo turned off Starlink connections because of a battle that he disagreed with, giving aid to the Russians. Well, that is called a violation of Contracting with the Enemy Act, let alone the violation of the Logan Act. Any other types of acts that are supposed to prevent corporations and individuals from doing business or giving succor and help to whoever is a hostile foreign power that we are in hostile foreign powers against. This guy can't make that decision. You know, this is a lot worse than what Howard Hughes did, and they hauled his ass in front of Congress. And Howard Hughes never had to worry about having his citizenship stripped away because he was naturally born here, unlike Elon Musk. Now, there have been people who have had their citizenship stripped. Relatively recent arrivals, especially from, I don't know, an apartheid country. This effort runs his companies like an apartheid regime. If you go by the lawsuits that have been filed and are continuing in court as we speak, why does this guy pretty much get to determine our military and foreign policy? No. Jesus. And then, of course, we also have to be reminded that he wants to go to Mars. I wish he would. Put him on a ship and send him out. All right, you get to live on Mars. Okay? No magnetosphere there, so it's not warding off any cosmic rays. What do you think Mars is the way it is right now? Whatever we were on Mars, we got off, or got lucky to get off and landed here. Why would we want to go back to that bone-dry, cosmic stripped husk of a planet? I don't know. You got big brains like Ellen saying, let's go. Okay, go. But I wouldn't want to get on a plane with them. I mean, look at this Teslas. They're blowing up all over the place. Anyway, it brings to mind that company that had that submarine. Submersible, I suppose, is what they called it technically. Not really a submarine, but a submersible to go to the Titanic, and it imploded. You know what they're talking about now? Going to Venus. Sending a ship that they say is going to float in the Venusian atmosphere and will have several hundred passengers. Yeah! I don't know. Venus ain't paradise, okay? And the pressures there are pretty severe, and they've already shown that they have craft that implode. Can they even get to Venus before some problem happens with a craft? I don't know. But apparently there's a lot of people out there who are going to pay big money to go. All right. Let them get out of here. It's the Darwin Awards. All right, what do we have in store for you here as we begin this fabulous River City Hash Mondays, the beginning of the week? All right. Well, at the top, yes. According to two major reports, the Department of Homeland Security has a domestic extremism problem. And Daniel Goldman and others are going to bring, let's hope they can. Because you know what's going to happen. Tuberville and others are going to come out and say, they're Americans. Are they? On the rest of the menu, Kentucky Governor Beshear has set the stage for ignoring the law banning him from appointing a Democratic replacement if McConnell steps down. Republicans are all about nullifying representative democracy, aren't they? A federal judge blocked the Arkansas law allowing librarians to be criminally charged over harmful materials. Allowing. And voting rights activists are returning to court to fight Alabama's redrawn congressional districts for failing to follow federal court orders to create a district that is fair to black voters. And Alabama's just saying, hey, F you. After the break, we move to the chef's table where pro-democracy Russians in Serbia protested after two prominent anti-war activists and critics of Putin faced problems with entry and residency permits in the Balkan country. Wow, that was really wordy. And a human rights lawyer who was fleeing China has been arrested in neighboring Laos. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is a link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month and thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay our bills and all the other costs that accrue because we are running a powerhouse of resistance and we pay our bills. Unlike some grifting, corrupt fascists that we know, who, if you're not corrupt and grifting, apparently that's the MO for being a fascist. Well, we are not that. We pay our bills, we honor the handshake, and we're continuing this resistance against that corrupt, grifting fascism that's creeping. I don't know if it's creeping. Looks like a blitzkrieg to me, but we're a small bulwark against it. We have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. All kidding aside, we do thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, or is it X? Well, we're calling it Twitter. And you can also follow us on Mastodon and Spoutable. You can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, and now Blue Sky. At Justice Putnam. In fact, that's where you can find me most everywhere online. That's right. And I incidentally post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime. That's automatic, by the way. Just put it in the queue over there on Daily Codes, and it publishes. It's great. Anyway, the show notes and links are where you can actually find the real reportage from the reports that we report from. Why don't you do it? You can also follow the show on Twitter, even though it's just a placemat, at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. just everywhere you can find podcasts, but you won't be able to find them on Stitcher because SiriusXM destroyed Stitcher. That's what they do. Damn them. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by the great T-Bog, Tom Bogiani, over there at Raw Story. According to a report from the Washington Times, should Senate Minority Leader McConnell decide to step down due to health concerns, Kentucky's Democratic governor already has made the constitutional case that he could pick a Democrat to fill the seat despite a law the state GOP majority pushed through in 2021. With questions being raised about how long the senior Republican will remain in Congress after an incident last week where he stood stock still and appeared unable to speak before reporters, only to be led away by some of his GOP colleagues, attention in Kentucky has turned to who will be his inevitable replacement. As it stands now, McConnell's term does not expire until 2026 after winning re-election in 2020. And according to the Washington Times, in 2021, a GOP supermajority overrode Democratic Governor Andy Beshear's veto of a bill that requires the governor to fill midterm vacancies in the U.S. Senate from a list of 3 candidates chosen by the state party of the previous sitting senator. As Michael Abate, a Louisville attorney who has assisted the Kentucky Democratic Party, explained, Beshear may ignore the law, appoint a Democrat, and challenge the Republican legislature to take him to court. Wow, I like that. I would imagine you would absolutely see a lawsuit on this, he stated. He added, Beshear either says, hey, Republican Party, thank you for your list, but I'm appointing whoever I want, and that immediately gets challenged in court. Or you could see Beshear taking the route of filing a lawsuit. I mean, he's got the guts to defy it. The Washington Times' Carrie Pickett reports, in Kentucky, Mr. Beshear set the stage to challenge the 2021 law when he declared it unconstitutional and vetoed it. The legislature's Republican supermajority overrode the veto. In a veto message, the governor cited the U.S. Constitution's 17th Amendment, passed in 1912, which states that the legislature may empower the executive to make temporary appointments to fill a Senate vacancy. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Arkansas is temporarily blocked from enforcing a law that would have allowed criminal charges against librarians and booksellers for providing harmful materials to minors, a federal judge ruled on Saturday. U.S. District Judge Timothy L. Brooks issued a preliminary injunction against the law, which also would have created a new process to challenge library materials and request that they be relocated to areas not accessible to the kiddies. The measure, signed by Huckabee Sanders, Sarah, earlier this year, was set to take effect tomorrow, August 1st. A coalition that included the Central Arkansas Library System in Little Rock had challenged the law, saying fear of prosecution under the measure could prompt libraries and booksellers to no longer carry titles that could be challenged. The judge also rejected a motion by the defendants, which include prosecuting attorneys for the state seeking to dismiss the case. The ACLU of Arkansas, which represents some of the plaintiffs, applauded the court's ruling, saying that the absence of a preliminary injunction would have jeopardized First Amendment rights. Chandler of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Voting rights activists are returning to court to fight Alabama's redrawn congressional district, saying state Republicans failed to follow federal court orders to create a district that is fair to black voters. Plaintiffs in the high-profile redistricting case filed a written objection on Friday to oppose Alabama's new plan. They accused state Republicans of flouting a judicial mandate to create a second majority black district, or something quite close to it, and enacting a map that continues to discriminate against black voters in the state. A special 3-judge panel in 2022 blocked use of the state's existing districts and said any new congressional map should include 2 districts where black voters either comprise a voting age majority or something close. That panel's decision was appealed by the state but upheld in June in a surprise ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, which concurred that having only 1 black majority district out of 7 in a state with more than 1 in 4 residents is black violated federal law. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, build it and they will come. So what's needed to construct an epic film? High-stakes events are good. Extraordinary characters a must. Complex and nuanced situations help. Add some A-list actors and a world-class director and you're pretty much there. And such is what we have with Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, based on Burton Sherwin's '05 biography. Saying that Oppenheimer was complex is true enough, but what's examined here is his intersection with complex events. Innovation from military necessity goes back to the catapult, and when there appeared the potential for a game-changing device from what had been the mostly theoretical sphere of particle physics, those in this field were suddenly in the limelight in an existential race not to be second to develop it. And this race was occurring against a backdrop of competing visions for societal organization, capitalism versus communism, which precipitated a paranoid and delusional response from every part of the American power structure. It's onto the shoulders of Cillian Murphy that playing Appétit, as he was called, falls. Appétit the physicist, the family man, the womanizer, the politician, and Appétit the potential destroyer of worlds. And he soars in this role of a lifetime with support from Downey Jr., Damon, Pugh, and Blunt. Moviegoers aren't unfamiliar with existential stakes, except that of late we've cordoned them off in the metaphorical, a la the Marvel-verse. Oppenheimer hits home because really it's all of us, here and now, who are characters in it. As is noted in the film, we're still near the dawn of the era Appétit helped create. Looking at who's in control of nuclear arsenals these days makes optimism a hard sell. And if things go wrong, there won't be any sequels. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
When I first went there in the early 1990s, there was a bathroom in a heated, comfortable, computer-driven observing room, and it did not have any plate on the door to say whether it was for men or women. But I already knew this story about Vera and the bathrooms, and so I went looking for the bathroom in question in the observatories.
You're listening to Alicia Weinberger, an observational astronomer in the Earth and Planets Laboratory at the Carnegie Institution for Science, talk about famed astronomer Vera Rubin.
And like so many other stories about women and science, this story also frustratingly involves a bathroom. But first, let's take you back in time.
Here are the youngsters, the 7 Von Trapp youngsters played by Charmian Carr, Nicholas Hammond.
It's 1965. The Sound of Music premieres.
Julie Andrews, the star of Sound of Music, trying to leave the theater, and it wasn't easy. Everyone wanted to congratulate. There's Christopher Plummer on the...
Selma sprang overnight from an obscure southern town to the front pages of world newspapers.
Martin Luther King Jr. leads 25,000 civil rights activists to a courthouse in Selma, Alabama.
And it was here that Martin Luther King came to lend his support to the campaign. He pointed out that from...
Astronaut Ed White makes the first U.S. spacewalk.
On the second, Ed White, secured by a golden tether, performed America's first spacewalk. He liked it so much he didn't want to come in.
I think I'm dragging a little bit, so I don't want to fire the gun yet.
And a female astronomer who would go on to change the course of cosmology is initially turned down from visiting the Palomar Observatory because they don't have the right facilities. In other words,
they could not give her observing time. And she learned somehow that the facilities in question were that there was only one bathroom in the dome of that, houses the telescope, and it had a sign on the door that said men.
But Vera found a way to, let's say, skirt this issue.
Sometime later, she went for her first observing run at Palomar, and so she made a little female stick figure with a skirt out of tape and put it on the bathroom door. And she said every time subsequently that she would go, the little stick figure had been removed, but she would remake it, put it back on the door.
A bathroom is far from the only red tape that Vera Rubin will face throughout her decades-long career.
But this dedicated astronomer, who started out at 14 years old with nothing but a cardboard telescope, would go on to discover compelling evidence of dark matter, which we now believe makes up most of the matter in the universe.
I'm Talika Bose, the Senior Multimedia Editor at Scientific American.
And I'm Clara Moskowitz, Senior Editor for Space and Physics at Scientific American. And you're listening to Cosmos Quickly.
So, it's the last day of Women's History Month, but we never need an excuse to talk about Vera Rubin. Clara, tell me about when you first learned about her.
I was one of a few female physics majors at Wesleyan University, and Vera Rubin was this famous figure, both because she found evidence for dark matter, one of the biggest mysteries in science, and because she really paved the way for women astronomers after her. She's the classic case of who the Nobels robbed.
Why do you think she never received a Nobel?
Definitely because she was a woman. I mean, some scientists have suggested that too many other researchers helped put together the data on dark matter to reward just her. But these kind of quibbles could apply to everyone who's ever won the prize. It's widely believed to be because of gender bias.
We can talk about the Nobels and specifically the fact that physics has the widest gender ratio in any of the Nobels at all.
But we can also talk about Vera Rubin.
A few weeks ago, I went to the Carnegie Institute of Science, formerly the Carnegie Institute of Terrestrial Magnetism, to film an incredible team working on exoplanets with the James Webb Space Telescope. But what loomed large over the Institute was the guiding hands of Vera Rubin.
What did you find?
Not only did we get to see some of the instruments that she used to measure galaxies, but some of the people we were talking to about exoplanets at the Institute had once known her, and they had a lot of memories.
Vera Rubin holds a special place for many astronomers, I think. I knew her. I was an intern here at Carnegie when I was a college student at American University.
That's Joanna Teskey. She's not exactly an intern anymore. She's a staff scientist there, and her research focuses on the diversity of exoplanet compositions. She's also co-leading a massive exoplanet project utilizing the James Webb Space Telescope.
Wow.
Yeah, it turns out that Vera Rubin has a long history in mentoring women in this particular department at Carnegie.
She really was part of trying to push astronomy to be more inclusive and make more opportunities for women in science and astronomy.
Vera wasn't all business, though, at least according to Alicia Weinberger, who we heard at the beginning, Joanna's former mentor and a staff scientist who also works on exoplanets.
She had a large collection of spectrum-like clothing and jewelry that she enjoyed wearing. And in particular, I remember, essentially a rainbow, right? A rainbow necklace of beads that she had. She also had a little rainbow toy on her table at home. She enjoyed rainbow socks.
And that's because Vera worked to take spectra.
That's where we break up the component light from an astronomical object into its component colors, which give us a lot of information about how that object is moving and what it's composed of.
Clara, can you break down the Doppler effect a little bit for us non-physics plebs?
Looking at the colors of light coming from something in space can tell us how fast that thing is going. Because as an object moves away from us, its light waves spread out, lowering their frequency and lengthening their wavelength, making things look redder.
To do this, Vera also worked with these new instruments that were developed at Carnegie, along with Kent Ford. One of these instruments, now in a Smithsonian collection of 101 instruments that made America, is called an image tube spectrograph, also called a spectrometer.
Basically, it was this instrument that was attached to several large telescopes in the 1970s to analyze spiral galaxies. And it allowed these astronomers to analyze galaxies that were further away.
Specifically, the Andromeda Galaxy, which was about 2.5 million light-years away. But she and Kent found something surprising about all of this.
So she very carefully, and taking advantage of new instrumentation that was developed here, was able to measure how fast stars in the outer parts of galaxies were rotating about their centers. And over many years showed that many galaxies, most galaxies, showed these what are called flat rotation curves.
A flat curve suggests that stars on the outside of the galaxy are moving just as fast as stars on the inside, which isn't actually what you'd expect at all. Basic Newtonian physics suggests that actually, as you move toward the outskirts, the stars would start to slow down as they orbit the center of the galaxy. When Rubin started seeing that these outside stars were still speeding around, it really offered the first strong evidence that there must be a lot of hidden mass extending way out beyond the stars that we can see with our eyes.
Let's be clear about something. It took Vera years of persistence for her colleagues to recognize this. She provided flat curve after flat curve for decades, until the data she produced couldn't be denied.
And she didn't win the Nobel, which people noticed.
I was so angry that she hadn't had that, gotten a Nobel Prize in the time that she was alive. But that's not the end-all be-all, and there are lots of other ways to honor people.
Clara, let's talk about the Vera Rubin Observatory, which is scheduled to be completed in 2024.
This is a big telescope that's being built right now in Chile. And when it turns on, it's going to photograph the entire sky every few nights to build up these really detailed maps of the universe. And one of its big goals is to investigate the nature of the dark matter that Vera Rubin helped discover.
It's also the first observatory to be named in honor of a female astronomer. And though it's unfortunate that Rubin never won the Nobel,
she's won the People's Choice Nobel, if that's a thing.
I'll leave you with something that Alicia said.
She had a tremendous influence on the way I thought about women in science and the capabilities of women. She said, there is no science that can be done by a man that can't be done by a woman.
And hopefully one day it won't be so notable if women win Nobel Prizes, because they'll be doing it all the time. Because, by the way, we still don't know what dark matter is. And if someone ever figures that out, it's a Nobel Prize for sure. Cosmos Quickly is produced by myself, Tulika Bose, Kelso Harper, Jeff Delvicio, and Lee Billings.
Music composed by Dominic Smith. Find Cosmos Quickly wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe to Scientific American for in-depth space news.
For Cosmos Quickly, I'm Clara Moskowitz.
I'm Tulika Bose.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Does a criminal defendant still have the right to confront their accuser? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Consider Adam Samia and Carl Stilwell, who were tried together for murder. After the killing, Stilwell confessed to a federal agent that although he had been at the scene of the crime, Samia had shot the victim. The prosecutor wanted the jury to hear the confession. But the Sixth Amendment guarantees a defendant the right to confront, that is, to cross-examine, his accuser. And here, Samia's accuser was the co-defendant Stilwell, who wasn't going to testify, which meant that Samia couldn't cross-examine his accuser. The judge's fix, that's in air quotes, have the federal agent who read Stilwell's confession to the jury substitute the word person for the name Samia, which fixed nothing because it was 100% clear that person referred to Samia. But when the Supreme Court decided Samia's case in late June, the majority held that as long as Samia's name was not read, his inability to confront his accuser didn't matter. Really, they said that. They also ruled that the judge's instruction to the jury to not hold Stilwell's confession against Samia, that is essentially to unhear what they just heard, cured the prejudice. 3 justices dissented. They said that for co-defendants in a joint trial, the decision meant that the precious constitutional right to confront your accuser had become, quote, a shell of its former self. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that the NFL Players Association went out on strike. The American Football League and the National Football League officially merged that year. Each league had their own Players Association. With the league merger, they joined forces into one union. The players elected John Mackey, a tight end with the Baltimore Colts, their first president. Frustrated by pay and lack of control over their careers, the players voted to strike. The strike lasted for 2 days. The owners threatened to cancel the season. The NFL used its powerful PR machine to vilify the players in the press. They characterized the players as greedy and stoked fan anger over the walkout. The two sides met again at the bargaining table and reached a collective bargaining agreement. The agreement covered 4 years. The players won improvements to their pensions and dental care. They also secured the right to have agent representation for the first time. But many of the disagreements over pay and control remained unsettled. In 1974, the players were back out on the picket line for 5 weeks during the summer. 8 years later, a 57-day strike disrupted the season. 7 weeks of games were canceled. Then again, 5 years later, the union went on strike during the season. This time, some of the players crossed the picket lines, including stars like Joe Montana and Lawrence Taylor. This broke the strike without settling on a contract. Today, the NFL Players Association continues to push for improved player safety and revenue sharing. The impact of concussions on players' long-term health remains an important issue for the union. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 90s, plentiful sunshine throughout the day, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, clear skies overnight, lows in the mid to upper 50s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10, and mostly sunny skies tomorrow, hot with highs in the low to mid 90s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and it looks like we'll have pretty much low to mid 90s throughout the week, and then we'll be in the upper 90s over the weekend. We'll see if that changes, but we'll be here to let you know. Grass pollen is rated as moderate here in our little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the moderate range at 60 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high, though it is notched down to level 8. Still, take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.1 inches, visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 73%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is literally the Weather Underground. London is 64 degrees with light rain. Paris is 68 degrees cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory. Rome is 90 degrees and sunny. Kyiv is 74 and cloudy. Kabul is 78 and clear. Hong Kong is 84 and fair. Tokyo is 85 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 44 and clear. San Francisco, California is 62 degrees, mostly cloudy, with a small craft advisory on the bay for choppy waters and heavy wind. And New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Weekend staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Pro-democracy Russians in Serbia protested yesterday, Sunday, after two prominent anti-war activists and critics of Vladimir Putin said they faced problems with entry and residence permits in the Balkan country. The rally came days after Serbian police refused to extend a residency permit for Vladimir Volkashinsky, and weeks after another prominent activist, Peter Nikitin, spent more than one day at the Belgrade airport because of an entry ban. Serbia's authorities have cited unspecified security concerns in both cases, they said, and there was no immediate response to an email request for comment from the police by the Associated Press. About 200,000 Russian citizens are believed to have fled to Serbia since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, as the fellow Slavic nation does not require visas for Russians. The Balkan nation has maintained friendly relations with Russia and has not joined Western sanctions against Moscow despite condemning its invasion of Ukraine. Serbian authorities have not commented on either Nikitin's or the case of Volkanovsky. Both have been active in organizing protests against the invasion of Ukraine and Putin's crackdown on political opponents. The two form the Russian Democratic Society in Serbia, which gathers democracy-minded Russians in the Balkan country.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Dake Kang of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Chinese rights lawyer stripped of his license for taking on sensitive cases has been arrested in the Southeast Asian country of Laos, with activists and family members worried he will be deported back to China, where he could face prison time. Lu Sui was seized by Laotian police on Friday morning while boarding a train for Thailand. He was on his way to Bangkok to catch a flight to the U.S. to join his wife and daughter. Phone numbers listed for police in Lu's hometown of Chengdu rang unanswered. The Chinese ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Lu had a history of taking on sensitive cases and of navigating the fraught and murky waters of defending people who are deemed to be political targets by authorities. Under Chinese leader Xi Jinping, China's fledgling legal rights movement has been heavily targeted. In 2015, hundreds of activists and rights lawyers were arrested in what later became known as the 709 crackdown. named after July 9th, the day it was launched. Liu, an insurance attorney by trade, defended some of those arrested, including Rice lawyer and G critic Yu Wencheng. Liu also defended people arrested for making liquor bottle labels commemorating the 1989 Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests. Obviously, a very big threat to China autocracy. And did China get this info that this fellow was coming to the United States by one of their known hacks of our security infrastructure? The mind reels considering that possibility. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.